I'm Kurtop, and these are 100 facts about the ancient world that changed history forever. Glass brain. Archaeologists made a unique and one-of-a-kind discovery during their excavations in Italy. The eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD was a catastrophe for a huge number of people. The Roman cities of Pompeii, Herculaneum, and Stabiae were completely covered by the volcano's lava and ash. Archaeologists are still conducting excavations here, trying to find something interesting. This time, they got lucky. They found an actual human brain turned to glass. The thermal energy released during the eruption was 500 times greater than the energy released by the atomic bomb explosion over Hiroshima. The remains of a 25-year-old man from Herculaneum, who died during the eruption of Vesuvius, were discovered in the 1960s. His body was found in a small room in the College of Augustus, a building dedicated to Emperor Octavian Augustus. The young man's body was on a bed, and judging by his posture, he was asleep at the moment of death. To conduct their research and study ancient artifacts, archaeologists have to piece everything together bit by bit. The archaeologists quickly decided to open the young man's skull and found a piece of glass inside. His brain had turned to glass. No similar vitrification appeared elsewhere in the body. Analysis showed that the material in the skull was indeed human brain. Characteristic fatty acids were found in the glass fragments. They couldn't have entered the skull from outside since there were no traces nearby. By examining the charred remains of the wood, scientists determined that the temperature in this area reached up to 520 degrees. The fat in the man's body literally ignited and the soft tissues evaporated. After that, the surrounding temperature dropped sharply, which led to the vitrification of the brain remains. The man's lungs turned into a spongy mass, which was also not observed in other remains. Scientists have already seen similar changes in the lungs in victims of more recent tragedies, such as the fires in Dresden and Hamburg during the World War II. From the glass brain, let's move on to glass tools. Knights of the Order of St. Lazarus. How do we usually imagine medieval crusader knights? Of course, these are brave, strong, bearded men in gleaming armor who swing their powerful, beautiful swords in the name of Christianity. But what if I told you that it was nothing like that, and the image of strong and healthy warriors is a myth? In reality, they were actually zombies in armor. The leper knights belonged to the Order of St. Lazarus. The story of this eerie army goes like this. In the 12th century, leprosy was raging across Europe, a terrible epidemic cutting people down one after another. And if a man caught this terrible disease, there was nothing left for him to do except scare disobedient children. In those distant times, people didn't understand the causes of the disease, but they were well aware of how contagious it was. That's why people did everything they could to isolate the infected person from society, so he wouldn't spread the infection among healthy people. The sick were usually kept in special places called leprosariums. One of these leprosariums was named after St. Lazarus in Jerusalem. It specialized in former knights. The Templars sent former members of their order there and paid for their stay. When the Ottoman horde was at the walls of Jerusalem, the knights decided not to sit idly by and wait to die, but to take up arms, put on armor, and go fight. Obviously, such knights could not serve as proper warriors. However, when even half-dead knights in armor decide to come at you swinging their swords, it will cause some trouble no matter what. That's why such knights were not only a psychological weapon, but also a biological one, since they were excellent at infecting the enemy's army. A 4,500-year-old ceremonial axe. In China, in the city of Wuxi, archaeologists discovered an ancient ceremonial weapon, an axe with engravings that is 4,500 years old. The axe belongs to the Liangzhu culture, one of the most advanced cultures in China at that time. Its people lived in the Yangtze River Delta. But when the floods happened, the people of Liangzhu were forced to leave their capital and settlement. This led to their complete disappearance around 2300 BC. Scientists found 329 stone tools, 73 stone and bone arrows, and many other artifacts made of pottery and jade. The most interesting item is an axe, which has engravings on both sides depicting a body, tigers, cloud patterns, and birds. The axe was found on a sacrificial platform, and it shows signs of wear and damage. Scientists believe that the axe was not used in battles, but in rituals and ceremonies to symbolize power. Liu Baoshan, the head of the local archaeological institute, said that the patterns on the axe were made using a harder stone tool. This is the first axe with a tiger engraving found in this region. Now we will delve even deeper into history and find out what our ancestors ate more than 100,000 years ago. Nebraska Man. A mistake, not a fraud. Nebraska Man is a case that occurred in the United States in 1922 and is similar to the story of Piltdown Man, except that this was a mistake, not a deception. Harold Cook, a ranch owner from Nebraska, discovered a tooth that was mistakenly identified by Henry Fairfield Osborne, the president of the American Museum of Natural History, as a hominin tooth. This led to the creation of the concept of Nebraska Man. Over time, scientists discovered other skeletal fragments and determined that the tooth actually belonged to an extinct pig-like mammal called peccary, not a hominin. By 1927, the idea of Nebraska Man was officially disproved. This case damaged the reputation of archaeologists, but unlike Piltdown Man, it was the result of a mistake, not deliberate fraud. However, this mistake was used in the debate surrounding the Scopes monkey trial in America and became an argument for creationists and other opponents of the theory of evolution. How Catholics put a dead man on trial. Once a strange and terrifying event occurred in the history of the Catholic Church. Pope Stephen VI decided to hold a trial against his predecessor, Pope Formosus. But there was one problem. Formosus had already been dead and buried for a year. Incredibly, Stephen VI still went through with it. He ordered Formosus's body to be exhumed, dressed in papal robes, and seated on the throne in one of the most famous churches in Rome. And then the trial began, which became known as the Terrible Synod or the Cadaver Synod. Since Formosus naturally couldn't speak or defend himself, there was a man sitting behind him who spoke on his behalf. In the end, the dead pope was accused of all the sins and punished. His fingers on his right hand were cut off. His body was dragged through Rome on a horse and thrown into the river. I want to remind you that all this was happening to someone who was already dead. But Pope Stephen VI couldn't enjoy this outcome for long. People were outraged by such a terrible act, and soon a rebellion began. Stephen was put in prison, where he was eventually killed. Later, another pope, John IX, forbade putting dead people on trial so that this would never happen again. And Formosus's body was found by monks and reburied with proper respect in St. Peter's Basilica. So even the most important people in history can sometimes do terrible and strange things. Write your opinion in the comments. Don't you think that there have been too many terrible scandals associated with the Catholic Church throughout its history? And what could be the reason for that? Ancient Mayan football scoreboard. In Mexico, in Chichen Itza, on the Yucatan Peninsula, archaeologists found a stone disc depicting two people playing tlachtli, an ancient game popular in this region. This disc, weighing over 40 kilograms, was used as a scoreboard to record the results of matches. Tlachtli, a Mesoamerican ball game, was widespread among the peoples of Mesoamerica before the arrival of Columbus. Games were held as ritual events and were sometimes accompanied by sacrifices, but more often they were played for entertainment. It's hard to disagree that archaeologists consider tlachtli the ancestor of modern football. Researchers estimate the age of the slab to be 1,200 years. Archaeologist Francisco Osorio Leon says that such finds are very rare. Iconography experts have identified the two central players. One wore a feathered headdress, while his opponent wore a serpent turban. The equipment is typical for pelota players, another ancient ball game estimated to be 3,000 years old. An astronomical compendium from 1550. Here's an interesting fact from archaeology. There used to be devices called astronomical compendiums. These were small instruments for complex calculations, all packed into one box. Astronomical compendiums were quite expensive and were a sign of their owner's wealth. One of these compendiums, made around 1550 in Augsburg, is crafted from gilded brass. Such a compendium included a variety of instruments, including a nocturnal for determining the time at night by the stars, lists of latitudes, a magnetic compass, a list of ports and harbors, a perpetual calendar, and a lunar indicator. With the help of an astronomical compendium, one could determine the current time, the tide height in ports, and perform calendar calculations. All of this was so amazing and useful that today it's hard to imagine how such complex functions could fit into such a small device. The most famous farter in the world. Have you ever heard of a man who played the flute using his butt? No? Then fasten your seatbelts because you're about to discover the unusual story of Joseph Pujol, or as he was also called, the Fart Man. Our story begins in France when one day a little boy named Joseph decided to take a swim in the sea. And so, after diving underwater, he felt his stomach fill with cold water. Frightened, he ran to the shore and the water started to flow out of him. But not from his mouth or nose, but from his anus. Joseph's mother, seeing this, took him to the doctor, who reassured her by saying that the boy simply had unique control over his abdominal muscles. This allowed him to fill his rectum with air or water and release them in a powerful stream. Imagine those blasts sometimes traveled several meters. After finishing school, Joseph worked in a bakery for a while, then served in the army where his comrades learned about his unusual talent. He even put on shows for them. And after his service, he decided to showcase his art on the big stage. Thus, in 1887, Joseph Pujol first appeared on the stage of a theater in Marseille, and within a few years, he won the love of the audience at the famous Moulin Rouge. He could not only produce fountains from his anus, but also make various sounds of different tones. His talent was so unique that he earned the nickname Le Pétoman, which translates from French as the Fart Man. Now imagine this. Joseph could play the flute, imitate cannon shots, blow out candles from several meters away, and even perform the French national anthem, the Marseillaise, using only the power of his anus. His shows were attended by such famous personalities as Sigmund Freud, King Leopold II of Belgium, and King Edward VII of the United Kingdom and Ireland. During his performances, the halls would erupt with laughter, and people would cry with joy, and of course not because of the smell. One of the most popular acts in his repertoire was a children's show, where he used his unique talent to imitate the sounds of different animals and birds for children. But unfortunately, the beginning of the 20th century brought sorrow to Joseph's family. Two of his sons returned from the war disabled, and the third son was put behind bars. This forced Joseph to step away from the performing arts and return to the bakery business. Joseph Pujol died in 1945 at the age of 88 and was buried in La Valette Cemetery. Experts from the Sorbonne even offered his relatives a large sum of money for the opportunity to study Joseph's remains, but they refused. So the body of this unique man, the fartiste, still rests in the grave, keeping his incredible talent a secret: beer instead of water. Did you know that in ancient times people loved to drink beer, ale, especially during dinner? But it wasn't just the beer we know today. It was thicker, more filling, and people didn't just drink it for fun, but to get extra calories that were so necessary for working people. But what about water, you might ask? Yes, water was available to everyone, even to the residents of crowded medieval cities. Imagine London, where there had been a system of drinking fountains throughout the city since 1236, and it was the same in most major cities of that time. However, water in those times had a strange reputation. It was considered a drink for the poor and the sick, meaning those who couldn't afford to gulp down beer and drink wine at dinner. But on a hot day, everyone drank water without even thinking that it might be unsanitary. Yes, before industrialization, most streams were clean and safe to drink from without boiling. It's just that in large rivers, especially those flowing through big cities, you could find all sorts of trash left over from city life. That's why in cities, people preferred to use wells. And did you know that the system of direct sewage discharge into the river once led to a huge disaster known as the Great Stink of London? These are the kinds of interesting stories hidden behind the ordinary drinks we're used to seeing every day. Stone road at the bottom of the sea. Have you ever heard of roads that are underwater? Well, archaeologists have discovered exactly that in the depths of the sea, near the island of Korčula in Croatia. This is a stone road located about 5 meters underwater and is over 7,000 years old, making it one of the oldest on Earth. Imagine, people could have walked on it long before the Egyptian pyramids were built. Scientists believe that the road once connected the island of Korčula with a part of the land that is now submerged by the waters of the Adriatic Sea. It's pretty complicated, isn't it? But imagine a road that goes straight to the islands, right into the sea, and disappears into its depths. Isn't that cool? This road was so large that its width reached 4 meters. Archaeologists claim that it could have been built by one of the ancient civilizations, possibly the Var culture. Researchers discovered it thanks to satellite images, and now they are trying to find out exactly where this mysterious road led. Scientists even found an artificially created island on this underwater road. They collected wooden fragments on top of the underwater hill, where there used to be a settlement. Radiocarbon analysis showed that these fragments date back to the 5th century BC. With these discoveries, we can look into the past and imagine how our ancient ancestors lived. They created amazing structures that still impress us with their complexity and craftsmanship. And who knows what else they left for us at the bottom of the ocean? How the first paper money appeared. Long ago, in the times of the ancient Phoenicians, trade was a complicated matter. To simplify the exchange of goods, they came up with the idea of using coins as a universal means of exchange. However, coins were heavy and slaves carried them using special handles. Then the Chinese came onto the scene with a revolutionary idea. Around the 1st century BC, they invented leather banknotes. They were made from the skin of white deer and marked with special signs. They could be used for purchases anywhere in the empire, and refusing to accept them could cost you your life. These leather notes became the ancestors of the paper bills we know today. Around the 9th century, the Chinese decided to try creating paper money using the technique of xylography. This is a method of wood engraving and printing on paper. But this flying money, as it was called, were not taken seriously at first because a paper bill could easily be blown away by a gust of wind. Initially, this paper money was used as guarantees for debt obligations, but over time it became a full-fledged means of payment. Paper money made trade much more convenient. Merchants no longer had to carry heavy coins, and metal could be used for other important needs. This new flying money resembled checks more and was used for large transactions. In just a few decades, paper money went from being a credit certificate to a full-fledged means of payment, becoming what we call paper money today. Europe at that time was still immersed in the Middle Ages, but the Chinese idea was so groundbreaking that it spread all over the world. And so, in 1601, Sweden became the first European country to print and put paper money into circulation. That's how the history of paper money, which we know and use today, began. The mysterious Book of Thoth. In the world of archaeology, discoveries occasionally happen that change our understanding of the past. Today's story is about the discovery of the Book of Thoth, a remarkable artifact that was found in the depths of the Luxor Temple by the famous Egyptian archaeologist Hassan Mahmud. Thoth, in ancient Egyptian mythology, is the god of writing, wisdom, and time. He's often depicted with the head of an ibis or as a baboon. It is believed that Thoth is the creator of hieroglyphs and numerous magical texts. The Book of Thoth is a scroll on which prophecies and parables attributed to this god are written. The majestic scroll is made of high-quality papyrus and has been extremely well preserved despite many centuries. But the most important thing about it is its content. While studying this scroll, Hassan Mahmud discovered a mysterious message. Thoth possesses knowledge hidden from sight. Whoever dares to read it will gain the wisdom of the gods. This message seems to have been addressed to the king who owned the Luxor temple. This artifact is incredibly valuable for archaeologists and historians. It can shed light on ancient Egyptian views of the world, the gods, and also show how the ancient Egyptians interacted with these deities. The Book of Thoth is incredibly mystical. The discovery of the scroll was a real revelation because its content and message allowed us to look into the depths of ancient Egyptian mythology and touch the wisdom of a great civilization whose history is still shrouded in mystery. Dr. Parker's Dental Show. And now let's talk about the man who changed dentistry. Meet Edgard Randolph Parker. Born in 1872 in the small town of Tynemouth Creek, New Brunswick. As a child, Edgard showed incredible resourcefulness when he decided to become a poultry farmer at the age of 9. Although that plan failed, Edgard didn't get discouraged. As a teenager, Edgard tried his hand at being a merchant of various goods, but his father was against the idea and sold his wagon. Edgard was so upset that he decided to go sailing with his uncle, who owned several ships. But fate brought him to medicine when he was injured and ended up in a hospital in Buenos Aires. Inspired by the work of the medical staff, he decided to become a dentist. At the age of 17, Edgard enrolled in a dental college in New York and even tried to start practicing, which led to his expulsion from the college. Edgard didn't give up on his dream. He kept studying and eventually earned his diploma in Philadelphia. After becoming a dentist, he went to Canada, where, in order to attract clients, he started an advertising campaign and offered a new service: painless tooth extraction, using his invention, hydrocaine. Soon, Edgard became a traveling dentist, pulling teeth without pain. After moving to New York, he met William Beebe, a former circus worker who suggested organizing a theatrical medical show. The show began with a lecture on the importance of oral hygiene. After that, Edgard would pull a volunteer's tooth without pain. All the spectators were delighted. Soon, he had an entire network of offices and an income of $3 million a year. Edgard may have been more of a showman, but he did a lot of good. He conducted free checkups, offered installment plans for services, and organized lectures about caring for teeth and gums. That's how one enterprising guy turned dentistry into a real show. How the English conquered India today? You're about to embark on a journey into the past to unravel one of the most fascinating stories. The story of how the British Empire conquered India, the jewel in its crown. Oh, those were the times. Here, rivers of precious stones, tea, and metals flowed, resources the English shamelessly shipped back home to sell for a hefty profit. And it all began in the middle of the 18th century and continued until the end of World War II. During this time, the English became incredibly wealthy, while the poor Indians grew even poorer. Let's go back to 1757 when the Battle of Plassey took place, a key battle for control over India. On one side were the English, on the other were the French. Both sides were here for a reason. There were major financial interests in India, and no one wanted to back down. So the English and the French had long been actively trying to bribe the local rulers. But this time, the English managed to play their trump card. They won over Mir Jafar, the general of the Indian ruler, to their side. And he, having joined the British, didn't even bother to engage in the battle. The battle itself was quite amusing. The French, confident in their superiority, turned it into a spectacle rather than a real battle. Instead of the promised 50,000 warriors and 10 elephants, only a tenth of the force entered the battle, and even then, without any enthusiasm. As a result, the English took the upper hand almost effortlessly, and the locals even switched to their side. After this lackluster battle, everything became clear. The English did not invest their money in vain. The conquest of India was only a matter of time. The country, like a captive, fell into the gentle embrace of the British for a whole 200 years. This story left a deep mark on the history of India, which unfortunately is still felt to this day. Egyptian tools. In Egypt, traces of stones being sawn were found, which were discovered more than 100 years ago. It was the legendary pyramid explorer Sir William Flinders Petrie. He noticed these traces even on the sarcophagus in the Great Pyramid on the Giza Plateau. He suggested that the sarcophagus was cut out of granite using huge saws 3 meters long. Saw marks can also be found all over Egypt. For example, near the Great Pyramid, there are the ruins of a temple. There, on the stone floor, numerous saw marks have been preserved. At the beginning of the 20th century, German archaeologists even deliberately put blocks with saw marks on public display during the restoration of the temple. Historians suggest that in ancient times, the Egyptians used copper saws, and since copper is softer than granite and basalt, it is assumed that the Egyptians used quartz sand as an abrasive. Giant snails. Scientists have found the earliest evidence that people ate giant snails. In a cave in southern Africa, paleontologists found fragments of shells from large land snails, which are estimated to be between 70,000 and 170,000 years old. Previously, scientists knew that people ate snails about 49,000 years ago in Africa and around 36,000 years ago in Europe. But these ancient shells showed signs of heating, possibly from cooking, and scientists concluded that people ate snails much earlier than previously thought. The discovery suggests that our ancestors who lived in the cave deliberately ate snails. Snail meat is very nutritious. It is rich in protein, iron, potassium, calcium, and omega-3 fatty acids. It is believed that the ancient giant snail shells belonged to the ancestors of modern snails, which were the size of a human hand and weighed more than 1 kilogram. In other words, snails had a lot of good, high-quality meat. Nowadays, people eat snails all over the world, including the Mediterranean, Southeast Asia, Northeast India, Nepal, and South America. Before this study, archaeologists believed that people started regularly eating snails and other small animals only after the end of the last ice age. But new data disproves this point of view. Numerous archaeological excavations have been carried out in Border Cave, which is in southern Africa. Fragments of shells were found there as well, which ranged in color from beige to brown and gray. Since heating can change the color of a shell, the variety of shades indicates that they were exposed to fire. To disprove this theory, scientists heated modern fragments of giant land snail shells to temperatures ranging from 200 to 550 degrees Celsius for varying periods of time, from 5 minutes to 36 hours. They observed changes in the color of the shells, weight loss, destruction, and changes in the chemical composition of the fragments. The color of the new shells changed to white or gray, just like some of the ancient fragments. Heating also caused the formation of small cracks, similar to those found on the old shells. The easily digestible fatty protein of snails could have been an important food source for elderly people and young children who cannot chew hard food very well. From the delicious snails, we will head back to Asia, where an unusual tomb awaits us. The mystery of the blue lotus. There are legends about this beautiful flower, and it grows only in the rivers and lakes of Africa and Asia. The blue lotus, also known as the Egyptian lotus or sacred lotus, has beautiful blue petals and possesses healing properties. This flower was very popular in ancient Egypt. The Egyptians believed that the water lily helped guide souls to the afterlife and communicate with the gods. It is also mentioned in the Egyptian Book of the Dead and was considered a symbol of immortality. One of the reasons why the flower was so popular in ancient times is its ability to influence human consciousness and behavior. It also broadens perception. In short, it's a powerful hallucinogen. Any ancient Egyptian priest was familiar with the magical properties of the blue lotus. One of the most well-known natural hallucinogens is ayahuasca, which is still used by indigenous peoples of the Amazon and Brazilian shamans when they perform religious rituals. Another huge advantage of the blue lotus is that it doesn't require special care or conditions. In ancient Egypt, medicine, magic, and religion were very closely connected to each other. Honestly, even though people nowadays are more educated and not as primitive, many still believe that illnesses can be cured with some kind of magical rituals and completely refuse to go to hospitals. The first mention of this flower was noticed by archaeologists in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and later they discovered the Ebers Papyrus, where they found almost 1,000 different recipes and treatment methods using the blue lotus. It's a powerful aphrodisiac. The elite often used it at secret gatherings in temples, adding it to sacred wines. Its fragrance is so wonderful that on the walls of tombs you can see images of people inhaling it. The blue lotus can be found in erotic papyri. Dahomey Amazons. In Africa, in the kingdom of Dahomey, it was customary for women to serve in the army. And they didn't just serve. An entire army was made up of Amazon women. There were two reasons why women served in the army. The first was quite typical for a wild patriarchal society. If a woman was a bad wife, her husband would send her to serve. The second reason was a real lack of men and the need for an army. The kingdom of Dahomey, like many others in Africa, was constantly at war, so the male population of the country was rapidly decreasing. Because of this, the Dahomey king decided to create a full-fledged army of Amazons. The Dahomey Amazons studied the art of war with great success. The army numbered up to 6,000 devoted and extremely dangerous women, about half of the entire Dahomey army, and each of them was capable of biting off the enemy's privates with their own ritually sharpened teeth. Many might think that an army of women was the kingdom's last chance for survival, but the cruelty and bravery of the Amazons allowed them to be defeated only twice. Throughout their history, the Dahomey Amazons won a huge number of battles, and their privileges and freedom of action would make modern men envious. Women were allowed to consume alcohol and tobacco, and could have up to 50 slaves serving them. The only possible penalty for touching an Amazon was death. The Amazon Corps was disbanded, but in 1979, the last of them still remembered the fierce battles with the French. The Golden Bead of Usina is over 1,600 years old, and once again, excavations in Jerusalem. A golden bead made by a skilled jeweler over 1,600 years ago was found in Emek Tzurim National Park by 18-year-old Hillel Feidman during her national service. Archaeologists say that the bead was likely part of a bracelet or necklace. The find was made by an 18-year-old serving her national service in the park. The soil was taken from a luxurious building that stood on the Pilgrim's Road. Judging by the finds made here and the shards of imported pottery, it can be concluded that a very wealthy family lived here. This find's value is in both its material and the ancient jeweler's craftsmanship. The technology for making such jewelry appeared in Mesopotamia in the 3rd millennium BC. Researchers suggest that the bead may be much older than 1,600 years. A jeweler needed great skill working with the material to carefully connect the tiny beads together without flattening them. For this, it was important to maintain the correct temperature. Similar jewelry has already been found in Jerusalem, but it was made of silver. The grave of a mysterious surgeon. In Hungary, archaeologists discovered the grave of a mysterious man, dated to the 1st century AD, in which a set of high-quality surgical instruments was found. This discovery was made near the town of Jászberény, located in the center of the country, where researchers initially conducted excavations in search of Copper Age artifacts. With the help of magnetometric surveying, archaeologists were able to discover a long-abandoned cemetery from the 6th to 9th centuries AD and began excavating several rows of graves. One of the graves turned out to be older than the others and dated back to the 1st century AD. This burial was shallow and contained the remains of a man who died at between 50 and 60 years old. The researcher was surprised by the presence of metal tools in the grave, which they were able to identify as Roman surgical instruments. The instruments were hidden in 2 wooden chests buried at the feet of the deceased. Scientists note that the instruments found were crafted to a very high standard. The set included instruments such as tweezers, scalpels, needles, and even ancient pliers. They were made of a copper alloy, decorated with silver inlay, and had removable, replaceable steel blades. A small stone mortar was also found in the grave. The wear on its surface indicates that it was used frequently, possibly for making medicines. Such medical kits are extremely rare in the ancient Roman world, and this is possibly the first such find made on the outskirts of the Roman Empire. Who the buried man was remains a mystery, as does the cause of his death. No visible signs of injury or illness were found on the remains, but there were no items or objects found in the grave itself, or they did not survive, that could reliably indicate the origin of this person. Therefore, scientists still do not know whether this ancient surgeon was a local resident or if he came here from afar. However, a DNA analysis is planned which may help to solve this mystery. Archaeologists also note that such a medical kit was extremely expensive at that time. Only a very wealthy person could afford to purchase it. The presence of such a kit may indicate the high status of the deceased and his professional skills. It is possible that he was one of the best surgeons of his time, and his knowledge and experience were highly valued. Menstruation and brewing. Have you ever pretended to be sick to avoid going to school or work? But you are not alone. Even the ancient Egyptians did similar things. Imagine this. Scientists from the British Museum came across a huge stone fragment called an ostracon. They found records on it, which were dated to around 1250 BC. And do you know what they found there? Yes, exactly. Excuses that ancient Egyptian workers used to get off work. This stone log was kept for 280 days a year, and it lists the names of 40 workers. Next to each name are the reasons why they missed work. Someone was bitten by a scorpion, someone else was taking care of a sick mother. For example, some of the reasons sound pretty funny to us. For example, some workers left work to take care of their wife or daughter during their period. Also, workers had to take time off to embalm deceased relatives. It was a complicated and lengthy process that required attention and time. And of course, let's not forget about beer. In ancient Egypt, beer was a nutritious drink enjoyed by both children and adults. And yes, workers sometimes took days off to brew it. So friends, if you ever feel like having a beer or brewing some beer, remember even the ancient Egyptians might envy you. The Ben Stone. This amazing artifact inspired the Egyptians to create two of their greatest architectural achievements, pyramids and obelisks. Imagine a sacred pyramid-shaped stone called the Ben, or Pyramidion. Every day the first rays of the rising sun fell upon it, granting everyone around strength and enlightenment. This stone was kept in the religious center of Egypt, in Heliopolis, where, according to the ancients, the creation of the world began. However, at some unknown point in history, the original Ben stone disappeared. This stone was connected not only with the gods Atum and Ra, it was also associated with the Bennu bird, which, according to myths, cried out on the Ben stone, announcing the beginning of the creation of the world. Thanks to these connections, the Ben stone became an integral part of the solar temples of ancient Egypt. The Egyptians covered it with gold, and the stone reflected the sun's rays, filling the temples with light. This stone became the prototype for the tops of obelisks and pyramids, which we can still observe today as we walk through the world's museums. Hand of Glory. Ancient magicians and shamans amaze and astonish with their ingenuity. Their knowledge of human psychology is especially inspiring. Not only did they manage to create magical objects, they also made people believe in their miraculous power. One such example is the Hand of Glory. The first mentions of this terrifying thing date back to the 1600s, but those are only the officially recorded ones. To create this magical object, you needed the hand of a hanged murderer. The most interesting thing is that I even have a recipe for making this creepy thing. You can write it down, just in case you ever need it. The hand must be cut off from the body of the hanged criminal, then pickled in salt and the urine of a man, a woman, a dog, a stallion, and a mare. Then it needs to be smoked with herbs and hay for a month, hung on an oak tree for 3 consecutive nights, and then hung on a church door for 1 night. And if during this time no fear drives you away, the hand will be yours. According to another recipe, the hand had to be, so to speak, pickled in various ingredients. 2 of them are ponia and zimat. Fortunately, we still don't know the translations of these words. So what's the point of this hand? Well, that's simple. By performing a certain ritual using this hand, you can open absolutely any door on the planet. It's a kind of magical lockpick. What's remarkable is that there are even descriptions in history of supposedly real cases where such artifacts were used. In the 1873 book Curious Myths of the Middle Ages, there's a story about a maid. During severe bad weather, a beggar appeared on the doorstep of an inn in the English county of Northumberland. There were no available rooms, but he was allowed to spend the night by the fireplace next to the maid. The woman woke up at night and saw how the guest took a dry human hand out of the light folds of his cloak. The maid saw him light a candle, which was held between the fingers, and quietly mutter some kind of spell. After that, he calmly wandered around the hall, putting more or less valuable things into a bag. Dishes, candelabras, and so on. The maid rushed to wake the master and the other servants, but they were sleeping a deep, unbreakable sleep. Then she grabbed a jug of milk and poured it onto the hand. The candles went out, and the sleep paralysis left the inhabitants of the house. Now, such hands are part of the exhibits in several museums, each with its own sinister story. The next find already had real value in the Middle Ages. The Soap Lady of Philadelphia. In 1875, during improvement works at an old cemetery in Philadelphia, 2 strange bodies were discovered. A man and a woman who did not look like the deceased usually do. Instead, their bodies turned into soap-like remains due to the process of saponification, or soap formation. This process occurs when the body's fatty tissue, under certain conditions such as alkaline soil and specific enzymes, turns into a wax-like substance resembling soap. The scientific term for this condition of the body is adipocere. after their discovery, the remains became part of museum exhibits. In the 1990s, the man's body was removed from the exhibit for detailed study. Radiological studies revealed the presence of pins in the tissues, which were used to secure the burial shroud. The studies also showed that the man was European, died at the age of 40 to 50, and had engaged in physical labor. The woman's body was also examined. Pins were also found in her body, and blonde locks of hair remained on her skull. Her skeleton was strong, indicating good health, but she was almost completely toothless. Currently, the man's body is in the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History, and the woman's body is in the Mutter Museum in Philadelphia. Cases of saponification are rare, but they do exist, showing how unique the process is that occur with human remains after death can be. Thanks to the large amount of fatty tissue, their bodies were able to remain well preserved for many years. Research and study of such rare cases as the saponified couple allows scientists to better understand the processes that occur in the human body after death, as well as expand our knowledge of the history and culture of different eras. New symbols on the Stone of Destiny. The Stone of Destiny is a very old, unique seat that is over 800 years old. It was used during the coronation of King Charles III in London on May 6th. This stone is a sacred symbol of Scotland, made of red sandstone. On one side of the stone there is a cross, and on the other side there are rings so it can be moved. For a long time, scientists studied this stone, and only recently they discovered strange marks and anomalies on it that no one had noticed before. They found traces of copper alloy in gypsum plaster, which may suggest that the stone has a secret history that we do not yet know about. Scientists from the Scottish Government Organization conducted a laser scan of the stone and found markings that resemble Roman numerals. However, it cannot be said for certain that these are actually Roman numerals. They also studied traces of copper alloy on the stone and found out that in the past, a copper or brass object, possibly some kind of sacred relic, was placed on the stone for a certain period of time. Scientists also found plaster on the Stone of Destiny, which may indicate that in the past a plaster cast of this artifact was made. There is no mention of such a cast in any records, and this came as a surprise to the scientists. The Stone of Destiny was used during the coronation of Scottish kings in the 13th century, and is now used during the coronation of the monarch in the United Kingdom. It was stolen from Scotland in 1296 and only returned in the 20th century. As for its history before the 13th century, it remains a mystery. Ancient towers of China. In the foothills of the Himalayas, there are amazing stone towers. Some of them are used by the locals as stables and sheds, while others are simply abandoned. People only started talking about the towers in 1998, when the French researcher Frédéric d'Aragon drew attention to them. Frédéric studied these mysterious towers for a whole 5 years. She tried to find information about them from the locals and in Buddhist monasteries, but found nothing. In the end, she found only a mention of the towers in Chinese chronicles and in the records of 19th century European travelers. It turns out that the foothills of the Himalayas were inhabited for a long time by tribes who lived in isolation from each other. Their languages and dialects developed separately, so the history of the towers could have been forgotten. The Himalayan towers are unique in their strength. They withstand earthquakes thanks to a mixture of stone, brick, and wood. The towers have different shapes: square, polygonal, and even star-shaped with 12 points. They are between 600 and 1,000 years old, and some are even older. Frédéric suggested that some towers served as a symbol of wealth. Residents of wealthy villages that traded with China might have built them as a demonstration of their wealth. Other towers, however, might have been watchtowers, since they stand near trade routes and their entrances are several meters above the ground. Golden Diana. The next story is about an amazing woman who was so beautiful and attractive that she captured the heart of the French king, Henry II himself. Her name is Diana de Poitiers. Believe it or not, Diana was 20 years older than the king, but despite this, Henry was devoted to her for 2 decades. He absolutely doted on her, gave her gifts, and built palaces for her. Even after his death and her exile from the royal court, Diana retained her beauty and elegance, which many young court ladies could only envy. The woman took great care of herself, wore a mask to protect herself from the sun, ate properly, spent a lot of time horseback riding, and of course used all the cosmetic treatments available at that time. And so, in 2009, scientists decided to uncover the secret of Diana's beauty and analyzed a strand of her hair. The results of the analysis were simply astonishing. Scientists discovered that the gold content in Diana's body was 250 times higher than normal. How was this possible? In fact, this can be explained by the fact that aristocrats of that time often used gold in their daily lives. They ate from gold dishes, wore gold jewelry, and used cosmetics with gold. But there was something else. Old archives contain records of a golden drink that Parisian alchemists made, especially for Diana. This elixir of beauty and youth included gold leaf, lemon juice, wine, and other ingredients that were believed to act as a slow-acting poison. In portraits of Diana, her skin appears as white as porcelain, which is most likely a result of anemia caused by the constant consumption of this beauty drink. But despite this, Diana not only maintained her beauty, but also lived to the age of 67. At that time, the average life expectancy for women was only about 33 years. It seems that Diana had another secret, which still remains a mystery to modern science. So if you ever come across a golden drink, think twice before you try it. Prussian Army of Giants. Anyone who is interested in military history has at least some collection of military memorabilia at home. Orders and medals, weapons and armor, scale models of military equipment, and archival notes. The first military collector was the Prussian King Friedrich Wilhelm I. He collected giants, and of course living ones. The king was so fascinated by tall men that he assembled an entire army of giants from them. We know that in the 17th and 18th centuries, the average height of a man was significantly lower than it is now. Therefore, in those years, a guy taller than 180 centimeters was considered a giant and was an excellent candidate for the Prussian king's army. You might think that back then a guy could choose whether to serve or not. In reality, if you fit the height requirement, you would be forced to serve in the Prussian army. And if you tried to run away, you would be forced back by giants just like you. There are stories that King Friedrich's love for tall guys went so far that he created squads of scouts who would sneak into other countries and kidnap tall citizens there. One day, this even led to an international scandal. One of these scouting squads tried to kidnap a man right out of his carriage. However, this wasn't just a tall guy, it was the Austrian ambassador. During the reign of the eccentric king, kings of other countries had the advantage. If they wanted to buy off the Prussian conqueror, they would look for someone special among their own citizens, tall guys, and send them as a gift. Peter I, for example, who had a strong friendship with Friedrich, established diplomatic relations with Prussia thanks to a special selection of Russian giants. King Friedrich forced men to marry tall women in order to create a new breed of tall people. This reminds me of something from the history of Germany in the 20th century. Even now in Germany, you can notice the great height of the male population. Statues that started to sing. Once among the sandy dunes of Egypt near the city of Luxor, you will notice two giant stone figures. They guard the ancient sarcophagus of the pharaoh like two majestic and silent sentinels. But one day, after a great earthquake in 27 BC, one of them began to sing. Yes, you heard that right. He began to make a sound that resembled both a whistle and a moan at the same time. Thus, the legend of the singing colossi of Memnon was born. No, this is not a myth. For centuries, people heard this mysterious melody. Just imagine, the sound became so famous that it was even used as a standard for tuning musical instruments. Hundreds, no thousands of curious souls came from all corners of the earth to hear the song of these 700-ton giants. Scientists, of course, couldn't ignore such a wonder. They spent a long time trying to solve the mystery of the singing colossus, but they couldn't come up with a satisfactory answer. They suggested that the musical phenomenon was connected to the dew, which evaporates in the morning from the porous sandstone the statues are made of. And under the influence of wind and rising temperatures, this creates that unique sound. The place where these colossi stand is called the City of the Dead. Here is one of the most breathtaking Egyptian temples, where the pharaoh is buried with his entire family. And by the way, these two similar statues depict Pharaoh Amenhotep III. Each of them weighs 720 tons and reaches a height of 18 meters. But in 199 AD, after a not-so-careful restoration, the statue's song suddenly stopped. People took this as a bad sign and were sure it was a harbinger of disasters and wars. When you find yourself in Egypt, be sure to visit the city of the dead and come face to face with these great giants. I'm sure this encounter will stay in your memory forever. I was there just recently and I was in awe of them. The most famous jester of the 16th century. A long time ago in the 1540s in France, Jean-Antoine d'Angleterre was born, nicknamed Chicot. He was not from a wealthy family, but still managed to study at the famous Parisian college. However, he loved the sword more than books. At first, Chicot served as a soldier for the Duke of Savoy, then became a courier, and later worked for the French king Charles IX. When Charles died, Henry III ascended the throne. Chicot had a sharp tongue, so he quickly became one of the royal jesters. Jesters were important people at royal courts. They entertained and gave advice. For example, before Chicot, there was the famous jester Tribule. Chicot not only joked, but also fought. He took part in the siege of La Rochelle and became a lieutenant of Henry III. Chicot was smart and funny. People loved him. He married Renée Barré, and they had 6 sons. After 10 years, Chicot became a real nobleman. But soon a civil war began in France, and Chicot found himself next to the new king, Henry IV. Together they fought and won. They say that Chicot died a funny and strange death. He caught the enemy, Henri de Chaligny, and brought him to the king. However, Henri struck Chicot on the head, and he soon died. However, no one knows for sure how it really happened. Perhaps Chicot simply died from his wounds, as befits a warrior jester. This happened in 1592. Here is such an interesting story about Jean-Antoine d'Angleterre, who was both a funny jester and a brave warrior. The mystery of the Etruscan tomb. A new discovery awaits us in Italy. In central Italy, in the city of Volci, scientists discovered a unique Etruscan tomb from the 6th century BC, which had remained untouched for a long time. Many ceramic vessels and a dish with a brazier were found in this tomb. During the excavation, scientists found 2 heavy stone slabs that covered the tomb. Behind them was a room carved into the rock, where about 30 ceramic vessels in excellent condition were found. A bronze brazier with coals and skewers, which still had pieces of meat on them, was also found in the tomb. It is likely that a woman was buried here, since no weapons were found, but a spindle was discovered. The woman's remains were cremated and placed in a special pot that the Etruscans used to store ashes. The city of Volci was a thriving center of trade and crafts until it was destroyed by Rome in 280 BC. The city declined and was eventually abandoned. Many tombs were looted by marauders in search of valuable items, so finding an untouched tomb is truly rare. The accidental discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb. Back in 1922, an archaeologist named Howard Carter encountered the greatest discovery of his life. In the Valley of the Kings in Egypt, he discovered the tomb of Tutankhamun, which contained more than 5,000 precious artifacts. But did you know that this expedition might never have happened? Western archaeologists had been exploring the Valley of the Kings since the early 19th century. When World War I began, the excavations were suspended and did not achieve significant results. At this time, Count Carnarvon, or George Herbert, who financed these excavations, appeared on the scene. He was disappointed by the lack of discoveries and was ready to stop funding. But in 1922, he decided to give Howard Carter a chance, who was convinced that there was something important in the Valley of the Kings. This was the last excavation season in the valley. Working tirelessly, Carter and his team had almost lost hope until November 4, 1922, when they discovered the tomb of Pharaoh Tutankhamun. It was a sensational discovery that amazed the whole world. In the tomb, they found more than 5,000 valuable artifacts that had remained untouched for 3,000 years. In Carter's book, which was found later, there was the address of Count Carnarvon, thanks to whom these excavations took place. Sadly, the Count died a year after the discovery due to complications from a mosquito bite. 50 years after Carter's discovery, Many treasures from Tutankhamun's tomb were exhibited at the British Museum. The exhibition was so popular that it was extended for another 6 months. More than 30,000 people visited it in the first week. On the first day of the exhibition, people stood in line for more than 14 hours to see these unique artifacts. Interestingly, in 1921, Howard Carter was a guest of Lord Carnarvon at his castle. This is confirmed by the census of that time. It's funny that Carter's documents didn't list him as an archaeologist. He was called an artist. After Tutankhamun's tomb was completely cleared in 1932, Carter decided to retire from archaeology and went into well-deserved retirement. He died 7 years later. This is an amazing story about how perseverance and self-belief led to one of the most important discoveries in the history of archaeology. The path to discoveries is not always straightforward and simple, but it is stories like these that show even the most difficult obstacles can be overcome. The treasure was hidden during the war, and once again, a chance discovery by an amateur treasure hunter. This time, we are heading to the Netherlands. The treasure hunter found a magnificent collection of gold jewelry and silver coins in the swamp. They are still being studied, but archaeologists already believe that they are typical for the Friesland region. Museum curators in the Netherlands think they were hidden there about 800 years ago, possibly during a war. The hoard consists of 4 gold pendants, 2 strips of gold leaf, and 39 silver coins. The discovery was made back in 2021 in the small northern town of Hoogwood in the West Friesland region. So far, archaeologists have not been able to determine the owner of these ornaments and coins, but one thing is certain: they belong to a very influential and wealthy person from the Middle Ages. Some believe that this was the property of the Countess of Holland. The minted silver coins come in different styles. Some of them were produced in the early 13th century. The newest coin dates back to the late 1240s, which coincides with a period of war. This explains why the owner buried these valuable items. Ancient Roman sundial. Friends, are you ready to be amazed? Now I'll tell you about an astonishing artifact from ancient Rome, a bronze sundial shaped like a ham. Yes, you heard that right. This amazing item was found in the 18th century at the famous Villa of the Papyri in Herculaneum. It was nicknamed the pig clock or prosciutto clock, prosciutto meaning ham in Italian. On the bronze ham, there is a curved table that helped measure the length of a shadow. The vertical columns show the names of the Roman months, while the horizontal lines indicate the number of hours from sunrise to sunset. Unfortunately, the pointer, the gnomon, broke off and was lost. But in 2016, scientists created a copy of the clock using a 3D printer and added a gnomon tail to the ham. Researchers conducted experiments and found that the clock works quite well. It may seem that the clock's accuracy is not very high, but the Romans didn't need to know the time to the minute. Moreover, these clocks were more of a status symbol, like modern expensive Swiss watches. People wanted to show that they had such an item, not just to tell the time. You ask how the Romans oriented the clock towards the sun without a compass. The answer is simple. They positioned the vertical plane of the clock directly towards the sun. Even in ancient times, people created interesting and unusual things that capture our imagination. A travel trunk with books. Nowadays, any of us can store all our favorite books on a smartphone or in special e-readers. In the past, there was no such opportunity, but people still needed to travel with books. For this, people used a travel trunk with books. Now, there are only about 100 such trunks left in the world. In 2019, the Bodleian Libraries of Oxford acquired one from a private buyer. The case arrived from France and was made of wood and leather in the 1400s. It also had metal clasps and hand straps for carrying. Most of the surviving book trunks date back to the 1500s, which makes them some of the oldest ever found. The most interesting find was a woodcut attached to the inside of the lid. It was a piece titled God the Father in Majesty, a draft from a liturgical book in Paris. Overall, the wood engraving was incredibly rare. Not only was it found in its original context and dated to the earliest attempts at printing in Europe, but it is known that only 4 of its kind exist. Archaeoraptor, a 21st century forgery. The next story involves the well-known National Geographic. Archaeoraptor became famous in 1999 thanks to an exclusive feature in National Geographic, where it was claimed to be the missing link between dinosaurs and birds. However, just a few weeks later, the magazine was forced to admit that Archaeoraptor turned out to be a forgery, made up of remains from different animals glued together by Chinese farmers. After this failure, the creature was nicknamed the Piltdown bird, in reference to the famous case of the Piltdown man forgery from the early 20th century. Secret chambers. So what could be hidden inside the pyramids? There are many theories here, from religious artifacts and treasures to ancient scrolls full of knowledge. And some are even convinced that artifacts of cosmic gods could be hidden in the secret chambers of the Egyptian pyramids. Do you remember the story from the 90s when a robot lowered into one of the shafts encountered mysterious doors? Ancient Greek and Roman scientists were fascinated by the pyramid builders' craftsmanship, and medieval Arab chroniclers, such as al-Masudi and al-Idrisi, wrote about wonders, gold, and mummies that might have been found inside. But not all scholars agree that the pyramids served only as tombs. Supporters of alternative history claim that the Great Pyramid could have been a time capsule, a repository of knowledge from an ancient civilization that became the foundation of ancient Egypt. And there is an even more exotic theory from Christopher Dunn, who suggested that the Great Pyramid could have been nothing less than a power plant. Don't forget the Hall of Records, the legendary ancient library where some researchers believe all ancient knowledge is kept, knowledge that could challenge our understanding of the world. Lost Fawcett greetings to all lovers of history and adventure. Today we will dive into the fascinating story of Percy Fawcett, a man who became famous during his lifetime but gained true recognition only after his mysterious disappearance. This British explorer, traveler, and topographer went missing in the Brazilian jungle while searching for a lost city. Percy inherited his love of travel from his father, a member of the Royal Geographical Society. He chose military service, worked in intelligence, and studied topography, but he had been fascinated by archaeology since his youth. Percy was convinced of the existence of mysterious ancient Atlantean cities in the jungles of Brazil. In 1925, based on ancient manuscripts and legends, Fawcett became convinced of the real existence of an ancient city on the Mato Grosso Plateau. It was given the codename Z. Percy, along with his eldest son Jack and his friend Aurelie Raimel, set out in search of it. A strange detail, Percy left a note asking not to send a search expedition if they disappeared. After the trio crossed a tributary of the Amazon, the Xingu River, nothing was heard from them again. The most common theory about their disappearance is an attack by cannibals. However, in the spring of 1932, new details emerged. A missionary brought a story that an indigenous woman had told him. The men were captured by the Aravudu Indians and traveled from village to village until they were killed. Despite Percy's request not to look for him, several rescue expeditions were organized, each with different theories. Some claimed that they found Fawcett in captivity. Others said he had died. A grave was even discovered, but it turned out that the remains did not belong to Fawcett and his companions. The indigenous tribes, taking responsibility for his death, spoke of killing him out of mercy because the men were ill, but no one could provide convincing evidence. This gave rise to a new theory. Fawcett founded a colony among the indigenous people and made his son the new white god. A small group of researchers believes that Percy found the lost cities of Atlantis and stayed there. This story is full of mysteries and unsolved puzzles that continue to intrigue us to this day. The superhighway of the ancient Maya. And now, we're heading straight into an adventure in the jungles of Guatemala. For the past 8 years, archaeologists have been working to uncover the secrets of the ancient Maya civilization. Fasten your seatbelts. We have an exciting flight into the past ahead of us. Remember how, as a child, you loved to hide among the trees and bushes in the park? But what if someone hid an entire city? That's exactly the kind of discovery scientists made, using a super cool technology called LIDAR. It allows you to see through the jungle, just like you can see through water in a swimming pool. Archaeologists didn't just find one city, they discovered an entire network of 400 Maya cities connected by roads. Imagine it's like a huge treasure map where all the islands are connected by bridges. And not just roads, but real superhighways. Researchers believe that these superhighways were not only huge, even wider than our widest highways, but were also illuminated by moonlight. Interesting, isn't it? It's all thanks to a layer of white plaster that covered the road. Can you imagine how cool it was to run along this road under the light of the moon? Richard Hansen, the lead archaeologist on this study, calls this network the world's first superhighway system. He says that these roads were like a web, connecting all the cities into one big system. And although our Maya friends didn't use wheels or domesticated animals for transportation, it is believed that they traveled these roads on foot. Can you imagine how they moved from city to city, walking many kilometers along these superhighways? Ancient hair. It turns out this terrible epidemic has a very long history. Various narcotic substances were popular thousands of years ago, and in those times, millions of people around the world died from this poison. Archaeologists found the oldest case of drug use in Europe, on the island of Minorca, near Spain. This person's hair is more than 3,000 years old. Scientists, while studying the Carix cave, discovered that our ancestors performed a strange ritual. They would cut locks of hair from the deceased, dye them red, and place them in small boxes made of horn and wood. Researchers analyzed the hair using advanced methods and found alkaloids, scopolamine, and ephedrine in them, substances that cause hallucinations. It's no secret that researchers can find drugs in a person's hair and nails even months or years later. Scientists believe that ancient people used plants that cause visions, such as mandrake, henbane, and datura. In addition, they ate ephedra, which contains ephedrine and acts as a stimulant. Now we can confidently say that psychostimulants were popular in Europe more than 3,000 years ago, and most likely even then, they were already a big problem for humanity. The mystery of Basil's Basel.
Mummy.
I already talked about this discovery in one of my videos. However, the story has changed. In 1975, in the Swiss city of Basel, in the Barfüßer Church, the mummified remains of a woman were found, and until now, it was believed that she died of syphilis. Researchers came to this conclusion because a lot of mercury was found in her body. In the 18th century, mercury was used to treat syphilis. That's why such conclusions were made, but now it has been established that the woman died from a bacterium unknown to science. The woman's name was Anna Katharina Bischoff. She was the wife of a pastor and died in 1787. With the help of DNA analysis, researchers even identified her descendants. One of them, with 99% certainty, is the British politician Boris Johnson. Scientists discovered a new bacterium, which was found mostly in the brain tissues, and this correlated with the highest concentration of mercury in the brain. Most likely, the doctor at that time diagnosed her and treated her for syphilis with mercury, which significantly weakened the woman's body. In addition, she was overweight, had gallstones, and other illnesses. In the 18th century, to say that a wealthy priest's widow had syphilis, which was transmitted sexually, was too humiliating. When people of such status died, an obituary was written about them stating who the person was in life, what they did, and what they died from. There is not a word about this woman. Such a diagnosis would not have allowed her to use public baths or receive treatment in a regular hospital. As a result, the mercury she was treated with slowed down decomposition and turned her into a mummy, an 8th-century-old mummy, someone's girl. This creepy story happened in Peru, like many others connected with ancient mummies and eerie rituals. 26-year-old Julio Cesar Bermejo sleeps in the same bed with the mummy Juanita, which he inherited from his father. Juanita has lived in this house for more than 30 years, but the main disappointment for this lover of older women was yet to come. It turned out that it wasn't Juanita, but actually Juan. By pure chance, the police approached the guy to conduct a routine inspection of his belongings. Julio worked as a courier, and in his cooler bag, he carried an ancient mummy, claiming that it was his girlfriend. He told the police that he loved her and took care of her, and she also sleeps with me in the same bed. I probably won't say anything about the guy's mental health. The doctors will talk about that after they conduct a medical examination. For now, he will remain in custody. The guy claims that his father brought the mummy home 30 or 40 years ago because the museum did not accept it as a gift. According to the former courier, his family bought it for 2,000 Peruvian sols, which was a huge amount at the time. Antiquities experts have already drew their first conclusions about the mummy. This Spanish relic is a mummified adult male. He lived presumably in the eastern part of Puno, a region in the Peruvian Andes, about 1,300 kilometers southeast of Lima. The man was about 45 years old. The guy said he just decided to meet up with friends, and he brought the mummy with him because he wanted to show the girl to his friends. It's hard to add anything to this story, so I suggest we move on to the next archaeological find. Sumerian carts and Egyptian chariots. When you see images of beautiful chariots and powerful horses in movies or pictures, that's a complete lie. In reality, if it weren't for weak and sickly horses, this type of transport probably would never have appeared. Chariots appeared because of weak horses, and in ancient times, domesticated horses and donkeys didn't have good, high-quality feed in their diet, so they grew up weak and unable to carry warriors on their backs. Chariots were invented for such horses. The design of this transport allowed all the weight to be distributed onto the wheels, so even a weak horse could pull it. If you literally dig into history, war chariots appeared much earlier than cavalry, but at first, these were war wagons. Archaeologists have unearthed the first war wagons in the land of the Sumerians, which were harnessed to 4 horses. That's how bulky they were. Archers and javelin throwers fought in the Sumerian war wagons. 3,900 years ago, the Sumerians invented the technology of bending wood. Light wheels with spokes and curved frames reduced the weight of the chariot. This technology was later adopted and improved by the ancient Egyptians. 3,800 years ago, hordes of Hyksos invaded Egypt. With the help of horse-drawn chariots, the Hyksos conquered Lower Egypt. But over centuries of occupation, the free Egyptians of Upper Nile copied these unknown technologies, and Pharaoh Amos IV expelled the Hyksos. Later, the Egyptians formed the strongest strike units out of chariots. 50 Egyptian chariots made up a squadron, a tactical unit on the battlefield. Squadrons with grandiose names like Thunderer, Lightning, and Osiris's Strike were part of the Pharaoh's army's tank regiment. Tombs of the earliest horsemen. I talked about the first chariots in the previous video, and in this one, we'll find out when humanity mastered horseback riding. Scientists from the University of Helsinki believe that this happened at least 4,300 years ago. Researchers studied more than 217 skeletons from 39 sites. About 150 of them belonged to the Yamnaya culture. At least 24 skeletons could have belonged to riders, which may indicate that horseback riding was already widespread 3,000 years ago. Evidence of horseback riding includes changes in the skeleton, the places where muscles attach to the pelvis and thigh, the shape of the hip joint head, degeneration of vertebrae due to vertical load, and other factors. To determine whether a horse was used for riding, there are 6 skeletal indicators. In one of the graves, which is 4,300 years old, only 4 of them were found. It was previously believed that horseback riding was mastered by members of the Yamnaya culture, which made them the first nomads and allowed them to spread Proto-Indo-European languages across much of Eurasia. However, it is still unclear what people used horses for. It could have been more convenient for herding livestock, or perhaps horseback riding was a symbol of status. But we shouldn't rule out the possibility that the main use of horseback riding was warfare. After all, historically, wars have forced people to invent new technologies and improve their way of life. To enhance their combat abilities on the battlefield, people used horses, and in the future, horses helped them solve everyday problems and sped up the settlement of new lands. The mummy of a mysterious creature.
Wow.
There are still many mysteries on our planet that continuously present archaeologists and scientists with new puzzles. And in Yakutia, Russia, an unusual discovery was made by accident. For now, archaeologists, together with scientists, are trying to figure out what they found there. A dinosaur, a previously unknown species of animal, or maybe the Siberian chupacabra. The story began when workers brought soil from a local diamond mine. One of the workers noticed a strange creature among the stones. It turned out to be a mummy. At first, he thought it was a small dinosaur, since workers had already found fossilized eggs here that looked like ostrich eggs. The find was in a layer of diamond sands from the Mesozoic era, dating back 50 to 260 million years. This could have been a real sensation. Thanks to the cold Siberian climate and permafrost, The remains of this mysterious creature were perfectly preserved. The workers handed the mummy over to scientists who at first couldn't determine what kind of animal it was. They photographed it and sent the pictures to their colleagues. Within a day, it turned out that it wasn't a dinosaur, but an ordinary sable. This mammal resembles a small, agile bear with a long body and sharp teeth. The find turned out to be fairly recent, but scientists still can't explain how the sable ended up in soil millions of years old. The animal likely crawled into a burrow and fell into a deep crevice, eventually becoming a mummy. Even though this mummy turned out not to be a dinosaur but just a sable, this story will help people realize that there is still much unknown on our planet. Who knows, maybe one day workers will actually discover a real fossilized dinosaur mummy, or even something more unusual and mysterious. For now, let's head to ancient Egypt. Calavera's skull, a fake discovery. There have been many deceptions involving ancient skulls throughout history, and each skull has its own legend. Josiah Whitney was a famous American geologist. He taught at Harvard University and headed the California Geological Survey. However, his failure was getting involved in the scandal with the Calaveras skull. The skull was discovered by miners at a depth of 40 meters beneath a layer of lava. Archaeologist Whitney presented it in July 1866 as the oldest human remains ever found, about 1 million years old. A little later, doubts about the authenticity of the skull arose, but the archaeologist had many supporters. Almost 3 decades later, William Henry Holmes from the Smithsonian Institution examined the Calaveras skull and discovered its modern features, which indicated it was a forgery. Further investigation showed that the skull had been planted by miners who wanted to play a prank on Whitney. The final proof was confirmed in 1992. When radiocarbon studies determined the skull to be only 1,000 years old, this story became a reminder of the need to think critically and to be able to collaborate with experts in various fields of knowledge. Archaeologists and scientists always want to take sole credit for all achievements, so when they discover another artifact, they are in no hurry to tell their colleagues about it, but instead rush to tell the whole world that the find is genuine. The Curse of the Polish King's Tomb. I will tell you about a mysterious story connected with the Jagiellonian curse. You probably know that Casimir IV Jagiellon was a very successful king of Poland. He made his dynasty one of the most important in Europe and even gained access to the sea. When Casimir died, his wife Elizabeth of Habsburg ordered a stunning tomb for him. It was a true masterpiece of art, decorated with coats of arms and biblical scenes. When the queen also died, she was buried next to her husband. In 1973, it was decided to open this tomb in order to carry out restoration. However, after working on the tomb, 10 out of 12 people who participated in the restoration died. This caused rumors about the Jagiellonian curse. It was believed that touching the tomb leads to death. But you know what? Scientists found an explanation for this. There was a dangerous fungus in the tomb that causes serious illnesses. This fungus usually lives on dead bodies, and when people opened the tomb, they inhaled its toxic spores. There is a theory that this fungus also lives on ancient Egyptian mummies. Maybe the workers who opened the pharaoh's tombs also suffered from the mummy's curse because of this fungus. But this is just a theory, since there is no direct evidence linking the fungus to the deaths. In the end, the fungus could have become the real curse of the Jagiellons and Egyptian mummies. Even though it's not mystical, it still sounds mysterious and interesting, doesn't it? So even today, when passing by ancient tombs and mummies, remember this mysterious story and be careful. The monastery in Sudan is decorated with Christian frescoes. Archaeologists from Poland have discovered a mysterious complex of rooms with Christian frescoes in the medieval monastery of Old Dongola in Africa. This city was the capital of Makuria, one of the well-known African states that became Christian in the 6th century. The scientists were studying houses from the 16th to 19th centuries and accidentally found a church with beautiful frescoes and inscriptions in Greek and Old Nubian. Under one of the houses, they discovered a secret passage leading to a room with amazing frescoes on the walls. On the walls were images of the Virgin Mary, Christ, Archangel Michael, and a Nubian ruler. The unique feature of this painting is that the ruler bows and kisses the hand of Christ, while Archangel Michael protects them with his wings. Such a scene has no parallel in Nubian painting. Another unusual fresco is the image of the Virgin Mary, dressed in dark clothes, holding a cross and a book. Christ on the opposite wall is also holding a book and giving a blessing. Interest in the history of ancient African civilizations and cultures is growing, and discoveries like this are becoming keys to understanding this continent's past. Now, scientists want to find out what these mysterious rooms were used for and how exactly they were connected to the lives of people at that time. Perhaps in the future, archaeologists will be able to discover even more hidden mysteries connected to this amazing complex in Old Dongola and other African states. Preserving these findings and studying history and culture helps create knowledge about ancient civilizations for future generations. That's why our channel exists, and I recommend subscribing and clicking the bell so you don't miss a new video. The earliest depiction of a kiss. Are you ready to dive into the world of a real archaeological detective story? Today we have a special episode about the oldest kiss in human history. Yes, you heard that right. We're going on a journey to the origins of romance and possibly even herpes. Do you know where the first kiss in history began? Researchers from the University of Copenhagen discovered its traces in Mesopotamia in the ancient Middle East, and that was about 4,500 years ago. Scientists say that people were already practicing kissing back then, and it might have even contributed to the spread of herpes. It sounds a little scary, but it proves that kissing has been an important part of our lives for thousands of years in different cultures and regions. Imagine, friends, in ancient Mesopotamia, people used specific tablets for writing, and some of them describe kisses as a part of romantic intimacy and friendship. And even our closest relatives, bonobos and chimpanzees, also kiss. Here's proof that kisses are not just a whim of ours, but the foundation of our communication and relationships. Here's an interesting question. Could herpes simplex virus have spread through those first kisses? Ancient Mesopotamian medical texts mention a disease with symptoms similar to herpes. Of course, we can't be 100% sure that it was actually herpes, but the similarity is striking. It turns out that both romance and diseases connect us to ancient people much more than we might have imagined. A castaway by choice. St. Helena Island, do you remember it? That's where Napoleon Bonaparte spent the last years of his life. But this tiny island has another story, no less amazing. Let's imagine an ordinary soldier named Fernan Lopez, who for 30 long years was the only inhabitant of this island before Napoleon arrived. Imagine this. A ship of Portuguese sailors in 1502 accidentally comes across this island. The water here is clean, there are plenty of trees, but no people at all, only birds in the trees. The sailors decided to set up a kind of outpost here. They built houses, brought in livestock, and planted a garden. And Lopez became the first inhabitant and lived here for most of his life. Now, friends, things are about to get tough. Lopes once served in the army and joined the conquest of Goa, but after becoming the garrison commander, he defected to the Muslims and was severely punished. They cut off his hand, ears, and nose. But even looking like that, Lopez managed to get forgiveness from the King of Portugal. However, deep down, Lopez was ashamed of his unusual appearance. When his ship docked at the island of St. Helena, he asked to be left there forever. That's how Lopez became a hermit, living in a cave, hunting birds, and growing vegetables. His story inspired the King of Portugal, and the king offered Lopez the chance to make a pilgrimage to Rome. The Pope forgave him and offered to grant any wish. In response, Lopes asked to return to his island, and he lives there until his death in 1545, hospitably helping every arriving sailor. Not only emperors could make the island famous, but also a simple soldier like Fernan Lopez. After all, even among birds and trees, even in solitude on a deserted island, one can live a full life. Every ship, every sailor passing by this island remembered Lopes, his hospitality, and his difficult fate. He became part of the history of St. Helena Island, on par with the famous Napoleon Bonaparte. Would you like to live on a deserted island alone or with your significant other and give up the internet and television forever? Write about it in the comments below the video. The mystery of how a device was invented. This is the story of Samuel Morse and his amazing Morse code, which is a unique code made up of dots and dashes. Morse was not just an inventor. There was a period in his life when he was a famous portrait artist, creating masterpieces and earning money by painting portraits of influential people. Thanks to this, he saved enough money to marry the woman he loved, Lucretia Walker, and they had 3 wonderful children. But life had a harsh trial in store for him. In 1825, while he was in Washington, Samuel received a letter from his father. The letter said that Lucretia had suffered a heart attack. Samuel rushed home to New Haven, but it was already too late. Lucretia had been buried before he arrived. This tragedy made him think, what if the letter had been delivered not by a courier who traveled for several days, but by a device that would be much faster? Maybe then he would have had time to say a final goodbye to his beloved. From that moment on, painting took a back seat, and Morse immersed himself in studying ways to transmit information quickly over long distances. Thus, after many years of hard work, the world saw Morse's electromagnetic telegraph and his unique code made up of dots and dashes. Today, Morse code is not used as often, but sailors, radio enthusiasts, and history buffs still use it. And although it may seem a bit outdated now, the impact it had on technology and society was incredibly important. It's a reminder of how personal tragedy can become a driving force for progress and change the world. The tomb of the Roman sorcerer. It's already hard to scare or surprise archaeologists, but this discovery in the ancient city of Sagalassos is an exception. They found an unusual cremation burial sealed twice and covered with bent nails. People in ancient times wanted to save the world of the living from the dead person buried here. Who was this person and why did they try to hide him even after death? You'll find out next. Sagalassos was founded at the end of the 5th century BC when the region was part of the Achaemenid Empire. By the 2nd century BC, it had become a rather important urban center of the Hellenistic kingdom of Pergamon. In 25 BC, Octavian Augustus incorporated it into the Roman province of Galatia, and this was the period of the city's greatest prosperity. The cremation burial was dated to 100-150 AD. The deceased was an adult man who was cremated and left on the same pyre. Archaeologists also noted that no one touched the charred remains after the cremation. And that's where it gets interesting, because according to ancient Roman cremation practices, the ashes were usually collected in an urn and buried in a grave or placed in a tomb. But even this is not the strangest thing the researchers noticed. Around the edges of the cremation pyre, someone scattered 41 bent and twisted nails. They couldn't have been used for practical purposes. Their distribution around the perimeter of the pyre indicates that the nails were placed there in some deliberate pattern. On top of the still smoldering pyre, 24 large bricks were tightly laid. Then the bricks were covered with a thick layer of plaster. As a result, a rather massive and well-sealed tomb was created. Interestingly, each of these practices had already been seen in ancient Rome: cremation, sealing the grave with bricks, and even twisted nails. However, in our story, everything was used in one place. Most likely, the person buried there was dangerous during his lifetime. Unfortunately, the remains of the cremated person were unsuitable for DNA analysis. Based on the pattern seen in other burials from that period, archaeologists concluded that the person buried there was an ancient sorcerer. This is exactly what frightened people when the sorcerer was alive, and it caused such fear that they decided to perform a gruesome burial ritual with the sealing of the grave. Give this video a thumbs up, tell your friends about it, and subscribe to the channel. I will definitely reply to every kind comment. Thank you for watching. Goodbye, everyone.